Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
And a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human.
The latest in social science, psychology, and American culture.
And what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion.
Our guest today is Dr. Belden Lane, Professor Emeritus of Theological Studies at St. Louis University here in St. Louis, and author of several books, including Backpacking with the Saints, A Solace of Fierce Landscapes, and his most recent book, The Great Conversation, Nature and Care of the Soul. As a Protestant member of a Roman Catholic faculty, Dr. Lane taught at SLU for 36 years in the areas of American religion, the history of spirituality, and eco-spirituality, where he explored the relationship of interfaith spirituality to the wonder and beauty of the natural world. When you read Belden's books, you are just as likely to hear him discuss Rumi as St. Paul, or Hafiz as Hildegard of Bingen, or Thich Nhat Hanh as Thomas Merton. He has been involved for several years leading retreats and initiation rites with men, beginning with Richard Rohr's program for men as learners and elders. His main spiritual practice has been hiking and solo backpacking expeditions all over the world, including Egypt, Ireland, Greece, Australia, and even his own neighborhood park across from his house in St. Louis. Belden Lane has been one of my teachers on how to see and experience awe. He is a master in it, and we are so glad to have you here. So welcome, Dr. Lane.
Thank you, Kelley. Delighted to be here.
Yeah.
It's a lovely introduction. Nicely done.
Thank you.
So we wanted to start by asking you about how you grew up. So what was your early formation like, and can you think of any moment of awe that shaped you as a child?
Yeah, that's a good question. I grew up outside Orlando, Florida, near swampland and a lake. There was a church that started up down the street, a independent Baptist church, fundamentalist church. When I was about 10 years old, my mother got involved. We all got involved. It was very rigid, very narrow. But the boys' Sunday school class that met in the furnace room with tools and paint buckets and so forth, we heard about this Jesus that was so much more loving than what was preached usually from the pulpit. And so I kind of got attached to that. The rest of it, it did nothing for me. What did do something for me in terms of awe was this little Lake Barton, where I would go barefoot looking for zebrafish, tiny little minnows, red-winged blackbirds that would be living there, water snakes, sometimes you'd even step on. That was the wild place that drew my heart, and it's always where I found the holy, found God more powerfully than most often in the walls of a church.
Yeah.
I think we have that as children, don't we? We all kind of have those magic places, I think, as children. Yeah. So since that wildness of your childhood in Orlando and in the swampland, how, and also kind of coming from that fundamentalist background originally, how has your image of God changed most, you think, over the years?
Oh, wow. You know, what I'm reading a book by John Philip Newell now. He's a Celtic former warden of Iona Abbey in Scotland, and he talks about the demise of imperial Christianity. Imperial Christianity began with Constantine, when the emphasis was on absolute power, on patriarchy, on being able to control things, control the way people think, etc. And I have moved into much more of a God who is vulnerable, who operates not from above, but from below, with the little people, as it were. That's my experience of Jesus, of operating on this grassroots mustard seed level, and perhaps eventually moving wider than that, but wanting to remain on the edges, among the margins, with broken people who care for other broken people. That's where life, Jesus and 12-step work, that's where life has been for me. And so my sense of God, I guess I like to think of God, of Jesus, as an underground guerrilla leader of a resistance movement that is at work to demonstrate the power of love over the love of power. So that's been a huge change from that very authoritarian up-down to a much more vulnerable from the bottom up. Yeah.
In that transformation, I wanted to kind of ask you, like, why you are a theist, but that kind of explains it for me for sure. I wonder if has there been any time as you've, this image of God has kind of progressed and expanded, if there was a time when you were not a theist, maybe?
Oh, still.
Yeah.
I am, I'm very uncomfortable with labels like theist or atheist.
Yeah.
It depends on what kind of God you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of artificial construct to think, especially of an invisible thing called God that I could prove or verify in some way. That does nothing for me. To talk about my experience of encounter, of love that I've found sometimes through deep suffering, sometimes through deep love, through deep nature, deep friendship. That I can talk about, but to speak of being a theist doesn't excite me. And being atheist doesn't excite me necessarily either, but there are things about which I have to be atheistic. And that is the idea of God being in control, a God who has to run everything.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work for me. It hasn't worked for a lot of people for a long time, and yet we still and I still do call myself a Christian, even as I'm uncomfortable with that label in ways. I try to be a follower of Jesus, but we are moving, as Karl Rahner says, beyond the imperial Christianity that might still exercise some power, but it doesn't exercise the imagination. It doesn't capture people anymore. And it's that sense of we all become a mystic or nothing in the future that most excites me. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You obviously had this really, long, successful career at St. Louis University. Did you find that your particular way of approaching religion was something that common among your colleagues or the students, or is it kind of out there?
Yeah, I loved my time with the Jesuits. They're incredibly intimidating in ways. They can be absolutely wonderful. But many of my colleagues in the department thought that I was kind of the touchy-feely guy that didn't really take the tradition seriously. I have tried in my books to do authentic, good historical theological work, and at the same time ask how that relates to my own experience of what I'm talking about. Yeah. And in academia, I'm out of it 10 years now, finally getting it out of my head, the university, being able to write without the academy looking over my shoulder. There is a great freedom in not having to worry about how I'm making the university look better. And I didn't entirely fit, but I was respected and even got respect in the academy and some programs that dealt with my work, valuing this effort to do both, the academic and the intimately personal, and how you connect those.
When you say that you, it's changed how you write, in what way? I mean, obviously freedom, you feel more free, but is there something specific?
At the very beginning, I wrote just as an academic with lots of footnotes and so forth. Then I found myself for years writing main chapters that would deal with the history and theology of a topic, and then weaving in smaller essays of my personal experience. Now I'm just working on personal experience alone. Yeah. And it's a good route to have come.
Yeah. Would you be willing to tell us? I know you're writing a little something now. Would you be willing to share a little, or is that?
I just finished a rough draft of something I'm tentatively calling a green outpouring of the heart, sharing praise and lament with trees. I have loved trees all my life. Samana Roy is a scholar and wonderful person from North India who wrote a great book a couple of years ago, How I Became a Tree. And I would love to become a tree. I'm fascinated by these tree saints in the 4th, 5th century. There were desert saints that went into the desert, but there were some that climbed trees. And they did it intentionally, not only to identify with Christ on the cross and a kind of bloodless crucifixion of their asceticism, but they delighted in trees being those that were always reaching for the light. They were known for their stability, their monastic stability. They stayed in one place. They were always undergoing transformation. Moving from one season to the next, from a dying to a rising again. And so that there's a icon of St. David the Dendrite of Thessaloniki. Half of his body is in the top of a tree, and the lower part of his body is just a tree trunk. He and the tree have become each other through their years of living together. So I'm fascinated with that and convinced that in terms of climate change, in terms of our care for the environment, my role in writing spirituality is to invite us to see that we are family first. We are intimately connected. It's not us and against them. It's not object and subject, but it's absolutely a unity, a mystic community that we are invited into. And it's out of that sense of oneness that we will really be able to move into the consciousness that can create radical change.
Yeah, there's a lot of philosophy coming out of South America around that same idea, where it's examining it from a place of political discourse, but sort of like, why are human beings the only ones that have rights, as opposed to why doesn't the environment have rights, or why don't animals have rights, in terms of just completely reshaping the way that we think about political discourse, or like what makes, and it's a very community based point of view rather than individualistic, but community encompassing the environment as well as the people that are a part of it.
Yeah, and the latest edge of that are plant philosophers who are arguing that plants have consciousness, a kind of intelligence, and perhaps rights that we need to think about as well.
Between the two of us, Kelley and I, we have 4 sons, and so we're interested in the work that you've done with men in the past. There's a lot of talk these days about the crisis of masculinity. What do you see as someone who is skilled in this work and has a nuanced understanding of it as the biggest shift in recent years?
I've been influenced by 2 men's movements over the last 20 years. Illumin, the work founded by Richard Rohr, the Franciscan in Albuquerque, and the other is the Mankind Project. Illumin is very much wanting to root its work in spirituality. We speak of being men, transforming men through a power greater than ourselves. The Mankind Project is very much concerned about accountability, about demanding that men stand up and accept their responsibilities and not exercising all this power and stubborn independence. And there's more of a, how can I say it, a sharp, gruff edge to the Mankind Project that wants men to be accountable to their families, their children, their wives. And there's a softer edge. I'm not entirely comfortable with the softer word, but a more spiritual edge with the Illumin work, where we want to recognize that vulnerability and compassion are things men have been afraid of for a long time, and it's what make men attractive and really capable of changing the world. So I love, in the past, men would never want to be caught with a book of poetry. But to see men, especially in Illumin, just weeping over great poetry, and mystics like Hafiz, the Sufi mystic, who, in one of his sayings, God and I are like two fat people sitting in a tiny boat, always bumping into each other and laughing. So both of those movements have been important. I'm involved in both of them with small groups for 20 years or more. But it's the Illumin work that's most powerful for me.
Yeah. What is it? So I assume is it a retreat based? I haven't read a lot about it, so I don't know kind of what the concept is.
Yeah, both of these are rooted in a sense that ritual is important for men, as it used to be thousands of years ago in primal cultures everywhere, and that we need initiated men. And so that involves, for example, taking men into a wilderness area for a weekend, 4 or 5 days, and working through storytelling, through ritual, through small group work, through time alone in wilderness, to do the same kind of thing that would be done with young boys in the past. But if we're going to initiate young men, we got to have initiated older men initially to be able to do that. So that's been the work of both MKP and Illumin.
Yeah, it seems to me that this idea of becoming an elder, right? Part of that is being able to point young people to places of awe. And being able to kind of awaken that for people, because so much we can kind of minimize and take away the wonder. Yeah.
And the best elders, I think, do that without calling attention to themselves.
Yes.
I love the tradition of the holy fool. Like Pu Tai in the Chinese tradition. He's always pictured with a frog on his head. He's playing with kids in the dirt. And the holy fool is the one who teaches us to laugh at what others take overly seriously and to take seriously what others laugh at. And so the elder is the one who invites us to a freedom.
Yes, I love that so much. Oh, that's amazing. So in that idea of awe and that idea of soaking ourselves in awe, and specifically in nature, as I think that's your primary practice. So last year I did the Earth Day retreat that you taught in Seattle, which I thought was kind of funny since we live about a mile apart. But we met on Zoom first across the country. You talked in that retreat about the idea of place and the holiness of place and the idea of topos and kora. So I was wondering if you would kind of explain those two ideas and maybe what kind of helps us transform kind of normal space into holy space.
I've been fascinated with place all my life, and certainly all my life as a scholar. Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish philosopher, said, "Tell me the place where you live, and I'll tell you who you are." And I think he also could have said, "Tell me the place to which you're drawn, and I'll tell you who you are becoming." Place is so powerful in its formative impact on us. So these two Greek words, were the words used by Aristotle and Plato, respectively. Aristotle was more of a natural scientist. He spoke of place as topos. Our word topography comes from that. And a topos is just a spot on the map. One place is the same as another. But Plato, more the poet, was fascinated with a place in a sense that invites you to dance. So the word choreography comes from the word chora. And place in Plato's understanding has its own vitality, its own power to draw you in, to immerse you in something that you don't know what's going to happen. And so the desert has been, even though I've lived in St. Louis along the Mississippi for the last 45 years of my life, I've been drawn to desert terrain and the power of that emptiness, that place that just undoes you, stripping you of language and of comfort and everything else. The power that has in the spiritual life for starting anew.
Yeah. I just got back from my first real trip to the desert just recently, a few weeks ago.
Where?
I went to Joshua Tree.
Oh, I've never been there.
It's the best. Yeah.
Amazing trees.
It was amazing. And I brought you with me because you were definitely in my mind when I was there. But man, I mean, it undid me.
Yeah.
I did not have language.
Yeah.
It's I feel the same way about the desert. It's one of my favorite places to go when I can. But there's something about the barrenness, but then that you have life, know, and in those Joshua trees or whatever the critters are that are existing in that desert landscape, and it gives you a kind of hope, I think, in that it's like that they can thrive in this environment that is so harsh.
Yeah. There's another idea that you taught in that topophilia, that idea that that the landscape kind of reflects the inner landscape. Can you talk about that a little bit too?
Yeah, topophilia is a love of place. It's I think what all of us have in various ways, that places that particularly attract us. What's interesting for me, one of my main spiritual practices over the years has been wilderness backpacking, as you mentioned. And I started about when I was 40. I had just made tenure here at St. Louis University. I had gotten settled into a career, and Carl Jung would be delighted that it was 40 when this happened, that I move from the ascent half of my life into the descent, as Richard Rohr says. And that involves going into wilderness, going into desert. And the desert place is, I just gotten lost in the desert myself. You had asked me about
that how it reflects the inner
life. Yes. The external desert invites you into the internal desert, internal wilderness, because it really breaks down that default self, that with all your competence and all your sense of being in control of things. When you're out there on the trail, you don't know what's going to come up, and you're vulnerable again, and the wilderness around you awakens a frightening quality and a fascinating quality of what's been inside there all along, and you've been stuffing it because you've been trying to meet tenure requirements and everything else in your life.
Yes. All that ego, the things that we have to do to kind of sustain.
Which is important as that is.
Yes.
For a young man, young woman, that's absolutely important.
Yeah.
You have to know who you are. But then you get over it. As Jung says, you build a tower in your first half of life, and then you jump off it.
Yes, I love it. We're at the jumping off.
Yeah.
Well, I've jumped.
Right,
I feel like
right.
you're
You've
probably
jumped,
in the midst of jumping, right? Would you say?
I would say so. I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I've been jumping for a long time.
Yeah. No, I'm sure. I think we jump and climb, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about grandfather?
I have one spiritual director who is a Dominican sister that I dearly love, Joan Delaplane, and the other is a 100-year-old male eastern cottonwood in the park across the street from my house. I got to know him 30 years ago when a thunderstorm and lightning storm broke down one of the two great trunks growing from his roots, knocked that trunk down. I counted as they cut it up and took it away, 80 rings in that tree, that trunk. That was 30 years ago. So grandfather is like 110 now. He has become a profound presence in my life. I go over there every morning, walking the dog, Joey, my golden retriever, leaning against that tree with the dog between my legs, sitting down, is the real way to start a day. And then I'll go over at night, and I will stand in the hollow of his wound, the tree's wound, and practice contemplative silence. And being present with that tree has been one of the most important experiences of my life in terms of learning how to be still, how not to keep running around from one place to another. Grandfather says to me, everything you really need will come to you. Just wait, just stay there. And he doesn't have any way of getting anything that he needs. He has to trust that the rains will come, the nutrients will be provided. And that deep sense of being able to rest in the mystery, to be able to find this tree who's changed so much over the last 30 years, and to realize how I have been invited in a little sense to become something of a tree saint myself. One of the greatest experiences of my life was climbing the tree about 5 years ago. I had a tree climbing teacher that helped me up to the top of it, sleeping that night in a hammock in the top of the tree, overlooking U City, the neighborhood, and feeling like I died and gone to heaven. Absolutely wonderful.
Wow.
I was just reading the other day. Is it John 14? The branches, the vine, 15.
Yeah.
Trimming
The vine and the branches.
the vine and the branches, and then Jesus says, remain in me, remain in my love, and I will remain in you. And that reminds me of what you were just saying, that this tree doesn't have a choice. It has to remain, right? It can't do anything. It has to just remain. It just has to abide.
Just to be
Just
is
to
enough.
be is enough.
Yeah.
And that's so hard for us. I wonder, you mentioned going to the tree and sitting in silence and stillness. What importance do you think that kind of silence and that stillness has when, especially when we're out in nature, to kind of create awe?
Yeah, it's difficult to enter always. In a 20 to 30 minute sit as I'm there with the tree, or at times in the gazebo under the trees in my backyard with the dog. I may spend 15 minutes trying to eradicate all these thoughts that are coming in, to let them go, to let them just flow down the river, and to enter into silence, and to be aware of my breathing, to be aware that a tree breathes, and the tree breathes me as I breathe the tree. Literally, in that I am breathing in the oxygen coming from the stomata under his leaves, and he is breathing the carbon dioxide that's coming from me, that's necessary for the photosynthesis process that he's involved
remain in me, and as I remain in you, right?
Absolutely.
It's there.
Yeah,
it's just science.
But that allowing yourself to move into that, stay in that silence and solitude, and not run away. It's so tempting to think, oh my God, I got this I got to do, and that I got to do, and this is more important. But nothing's more important.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It is. I feel like we, as a culture, just don't make the space or time for that at all. I mean, and I don't know how do you? I mean, you guys are sharing this with people, but like to share that with more people is so important, and I feel like it just keeps ramping up.
Yeah.
You know?
Everything in our culture says, stay busy.
Yep.
You know, keep talking. Don't let the lights go out.
Yeah.
Especially with kids, right?
Oh, gosh.
Especially with kids.
Yeah. Our toddler turns the light on in her room, like in the middle of the night. She gets up and turns the light on. Like, oh, my God. Yeah, so that love of place in suburban and urban spaces. I mean, we'd obviously love to send everybody to the desert so they can experience what we've experienced, but that's not always possible for everybody. I mean, you've described your experience with grandfather. So, I mean, at a park near you, I suppose you could find these same things. But I don't know if you have any suggestions for people.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to give the impression from my books that you have to go out to some exotic wilderness place to discover yourself or discover the holy. Louis Agassiz was a great naturalist, taught at Harvard 100 years ago. And he once said to students coming back after the summer, I spent the summer traveling and got halfway across my backyard. I love it. You know, it's like all you need is a copy of Robin Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. Get down on your hands and knees in your backyard and you're good. Everything is there. Nature invites us in all of its large and small ways. We were talking a little bit earlier about an exercise that I often did with students when I was teaching. We'd go outside the classroom building and do a micro hike. And that involved having a tent stake with a 15-inch length of string attached to it. You were invited to put the tent stake in the ground anywhere you chose and spend the next half hour or hour looking only at the perimeter of that tent stake with its 15-inch string and studying, getting down on your hands and knees, looking at all the pathways that you hadn't imagined, all the creatures that are much bigger than you might have thought, and tiny little plants that you had never imagined down there. I had one student, wonderful ecstatic experience. Students don't usually have ecstatic experiences in class. But he had thought this was the stupidest thing in the world, and so he'd put his tent stake in a patch of dirt or dead grass and started to go to sleep. And as he's going to sleep, he notices a spider walking up on the top of his tent stake. And the spider turns around and then shoots out a length of web about 10 inches long from her spinneret in her rear end and pulls it back in. And he'd never seen that before. And then he's really intent watching this as the spider then spins a length of web over to his hands that are closed there as he's on his stomach watching this happen. The spider walks across the web to his hand, then looks around, shoots up a length of web to his forehead, starts to walk up it. He's fascinated by this. It's a tiny little spider. He's not afraid. And it's time now for the class to go back inside and talk about the experience. He doesn't want to end this. It's so amazing. But he also can't wait to tell somebody about it. Yeah. So he disconnects the spider carefully from himself and the web, and he runs over to me, ecstatic that he'd never been still enough to watch a spider spin its web, much less to have it spin its web on him. And so tiny little exercises that you can find of anywhere can take you into a world you never dreamed of. And all the scientists are absolutely aware of that. You don't have to go exotic places.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
It's a great story.
So, in terms of this image of God as wild that you were talking about earlier, I wonder, what do you think that we would gain as a culture if we actually started experiencing or imagining God as wild and awe-filled?
I think our God, in most cases, is far too domesticated, far too safe, comfortable, predictable. And the God that I love is both vast and intimate, wild and amazingly compassionate. My experience of the world, I know it's dangerous. I have gotten myself into some tight places at times in wilderness where I should have had better sense. But it's being at the edge sometimes that allows you to see God in all of God's wonder and power and vulnerability and deep love, all mashed up together in a way that I can't explain. I had a chance to be in the outback of Western Australia some years ago and thought, here I'm on the edge of a Aboriginal songline. And I'm going to hike that songline. I didn't know anything about the particularities of it. I just knew a little bit about what I'd read of the Dreamtime and how Aborigines will still walk the songline to sing into being the world anew. And I thought, here I get a chance to hike on a songline. And I took my pack and I was going to go overnight. I followed a compass bearing. And into the next day, I got lost and had no idea where I was. And thought, what in the hell have you been thinking? And the wildness of eucalyptus trees and cactuses and just an expanse going on. I was like 300 miles from any much civilization other than this retreat center. And I very carefully tried to follow my compass bearing back as I thought I was going. And finally, after several hours, saw my tent, got back to my campsite, sat under a gum tree, and suddenly these pied butcher birds, these beautiful red and white, black and white birds that are beautiful there in Australia. They came all around the branches singing as if to say, "You silly white fella, here, you thought you were going to sing the song lines. We'll sing it for you." And it was a magnificent sense of being undone, of finding God in all of God's scary as hell wildness. And the compassion that even in our stupidest moments, we can be loved and cared for.
Taken care of,
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
All right. Are you familiar with Dr. Keltner's work out at UC Berkeley? So
On awe.
I
haven't had a chance. Kelley mentioned it, but I haven't had a chance. Speaking of 8 different ways of experiencing awe or something. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So here, let me pull up. So the list is so he was, trying to study, the good life essentially, like how and help people find a sense of satisfaction in life. And one of what he what his research honed in on was experiencing awe is the way that most people, experience the good life. And so those things that he did this study that was across different kinds of groups of people, different countries, not necessarily just the United States, and different ages, race, sex. So, and the common themes that came up over and over again were other people's courage, kindness, strength, or overcoming. So observing that in someone else.
That was the number one way that we experience awe. Yeah.
Collective effervescence. So this, if we're at a, St. Louis City soccer game and we're all screaming for the team, or at a concert, maybe
even just doing something in unison,
dancing, yeah.
Tai Chi, even, right?
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah, where you feel like that hive mind gets activated. Experiences of nature, music, visual design, spiritual and religious awe, stories of life and death, and then epiphany, which he was, felt like that's epiphany is one of those things that we can all, access frequently if we dedicate ourselves to studying, or being attentive in the way that you've described, observing nature, right? That there are epiphanies to be had in slowing down and really being observant and aware. I think a lot of it has to do with being attentive, right, to the things that are important. So the in those 8 ways, including experiences of nature and birth and death and moments of epiphany, he opens the book with a description of his brother passing away who had cancer, and him and his family members all being in the room at the time, and each of them sort of like holding a foot or a hand and being there in that moment. And Kelley had shared with me that you had an experience of awe that included both the death of someone that was close to you as a powerful epiphany about God and nature. Would you be willing to talk to us about that?
Yeah. 2.5 years ago, our son, 40 years old, died of cancer. It came out of nowhere, acute myeloid leukemia, one of the deadliest forms. He was in chemo for months at the hospital, was declared cancer-free eventually, rang the bell there on the hospital floor. Went home, returned to work. 2 months later, the cancer came back, and he was dead within a week.
Oh, my God.
So I knew into my grieving, maybe a year into that, after John's death, that I imagined his anger. Thinking, what the hell? Here, I'm clean and sober after 10 years, having done 12-step work. I've married a wonderful wife. I have a 6-year-old daughter that's just absolutely beautiful. What the fuck were you thinking, God? And he must be on the other side wrestling with it. So I needed to go to the desert to help John through, as it were. And found some friends who would go with me from the Illumin work. And there's something about Red Rock Canyons, especially just south of Ghost Ranch, north of Santa Fe, that I absolutely love. We were there. I was there fasting alone up on a ridge for 4 days. There's something about fasting for 4 days that I'd never done before that's powerful in itself. Looking out across the canyon toward this orphan mesa standing by itself, huge, tall mesa. And being taken to the edge, literally. That first night, I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning. It was still very dark, but light was just beginning to dawn. And as the sun rose behind me, behind the ridge behind me, I could see a light mauve red color on the top of the mesa across the canyonway. And then as the sun rose up higher, it turned into a deep red orange, absolutely beautiful as it's working its way down the mesa as the sun rises behind me. And I have this deep sense of my redheaded son coming back to assure me that he's well and that I'm the one that needs work and he's going to be there for me. And that in itself was an amazing gift. But on the last night, that's on a vision quest. That's when you're looking for the big deal. Mm-hmm. And awake all night, I'm staying awake waiting for the vision to come. And nothing happens, as is always the case. And I give up and I think, let's just stay awake the rest of the night. I went back to that last night in John's hospital room as he died. He died at 3 o'clock in the morning. His wife was just exhausted. My wife, Patricia, and we all were. They needed to get home. I wanted to stay, though. I did not want staff to come in and put his body on a metal tray and take him down to the morgue. I wanted to be there at least until the daylight came. But I didn't. I went home with my family. But the thought came to me that night there on the desert ridge that I could stay there. I could be faithful. Here, what was a year later, I could stay with John through the night. And it was maybe 2 or 3 hours later that the moon rose, a full moon, again behind me of the ridge, and beginning to light up once more that orphan mesa with a pale white light that made me think of the pale body of my dead son coming again for me, that in life and in death, it's all one. It's all good. You can give it up, Dad. And so, Epiphany. What is it, through a sun that comes back to you? Is it through a desert terrain? Is it through a God that rises? Thank you.
It's a beautiful story.
Beautiful. And it's both, right?
It is absolutely both. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that both and, that's the place where the mystics live, would you say?
Yeah. It's where you absolutely run out of language. All you got left is storytelling and poetry.
Yeah.
And they don't even begin to do the job of trying to express what you can. All the great mystics say you can love even that which you can't know. That loving is a way of knowing. And to find yourself falling in love, being invited to an unaccountable love, is absolutely stunning, beyond all words. And what the mystics again and again experienced. John of the Cross in his prison cell, speaking of the nada, the nothing. That nothing that he can put into words that he can describe. The only thing he can think of, that story of the woman in the Song of Songs. Her lover is gone away, and she's longing for his return. And she hears something at the door, wondering, it could be frightening in the night. What is this? And discovered that it might be the lover. That comes in the middle of nothingness, in the absence of language. That's what you live for.
Yeah. Erin and I, last time we chatted, when part of our conversations and why we feel like there's such a rich space is we're looking for we're looking for the sameness, right? Which there's so much of. There's so much more of that, right?
Absolutely.
And in a world and a culture that wants to kind of claim what's different from me than you, it feels like for me it feels like holy work. It feels like special work to talk and find those places. And we both talked last time about how suffering is the importance or the transformational power of suffering.
Can be a great teacher.
Absolutely. But I got to tell you one more little story, Erin. You mentioned that, who's the writer on awe?
Dr. Keltner. He's a professor at UC Berkeley.
Yeah. He says the most important thing that people across the board mention is other people's courage.
Yeah.
My now just turned 7-year-old granddaughter that I get to spend time with 3 days a week. She was over yesterday. We went over to see grandfather, as always. Her ability, her courage. She still talks about her dad. She has worked through her mom and her were in a grief workshop with other children and did a lot of good things. And what we'll do, one of our favorite things, we'll pass by grandfather on our way to the playground, and she's heard me tell the story that the Lakota people say that cottonwood trees are sacred because their leaves dance, they rustle in the least little wind, and that whenever they're rustling, they're praying. And so Ellie will say invariably when we're going by grandfather, she'll say, "Oh, Babu, listen, he's praying again," as the leaves are rustling. And I will often invite her to stand inside the hollow of grandfather's tree and to sing for him. And her favorite song to sing for him is "You Are My Sunshine." Oh. What song would a tree rather have than
I can't think of one.
"You Are My Sunshine"? And to hear that child sing, that daddyless child, singing to a tree in its hollow, in a tree that's been wounded, but that knows love. Yeah. That's, again, what it's all about.
That's what it's all
That's
about.
all.
Yeah. I'd like to read something that you've written. That's all right.
Sure.
And this speaks to your granddaughter. Erin and I, both having worked with young people and both having children, hers much younger than mine. We're two people who are concerned deeply with our young people and their ability to see awe. And I read this in an article that you had written where you quote T.S. Eliot on learning how to care and not to care. And this was a really powerful learning for me. And so I'm going to read this little bit. And then I wonder if you might be able to give us some insight into maybe how to teach our children this and how you're teaching your granddaughter. You write, "The high desert country is a perfect place for reflecting on the hearty and compelling spirituality of the desert Christians. These weathered saints who served us as an example for all who followed knew the answers to the two great desert questions. What do you learn to ignore, and what do you learn to love? I've come here to be reminded of the indifference I need to exercise in my life and the indifference I need to resist. On the one hand, I tend to care entirely too much about others' approval. I need to ignore it. On the other hand, when I'm not appreciated enough, I'm eaten by resentment and begin to turn inward, and a crippling indifference creeps up. The desert Christians identified these two very different kinds of indifference as apatheia and acedia. They saw the one as an important virtue, trimming one's life of trivial matters, and the other as the worst of the 7 deadly sins, undercutting any possibility of love. So I'm here, as T.S. Eliot says, to learn both to care and not to care, to sort through the curious relationship between the practice of indifference and the freedom to love. So I wonder, when we look for awe in unimportant things, we're living in this place of kind of dissonance, right? When we're paying too much attention to these unimportant things. So with kids with phones in their hands and social media on their minds, how do we teach these lessons of detachment of the desert to young people?
Well, we don't use words. You never use words with what's most important that you want to communicate to children. You live it in front of them. To let Ellie see me cry, crying over the loss of her daddy, to see me on my hands and knees playing. We made a underground cave yesterday. I had it for 6 hours yesterday. She was on spring break, and we put a big blanket over the dining room table, and we're underneath there, and Joey is sticking his nose in, our golden retriever, and we're talking about scary things, and she has this mask that she loves to put on to scare me, and then she'll take off the mask and say, "It's just me, Babu. It's just me." And to be able to show our children that we can be scared of things, that we can be really sad about things, that we can laugh and be holy fools about things, and to invite them to that. And that's stuff you'll never find on a cell phone. It involves putting the damn thing down and going across the street at the park and playing. But, you mentioned those two kinds of indifference that the desert Christians spoke of. The apatheia, which is a fierce indifference to unimportant things, stuff that doesn't matter.
I want that on a T-shirt so bad.
Yeah. Oh, me too. That's a good idea. I need one. I spent so much of my life trying to please people, trying to earn approval, trying to get God's approval. I love Julian of Norwich because she says, there's nothing you can do to get God's approval. You got it already. And that not only can you be assured of your sins being forgiven, but that your sins were necessary all along. And doing those stupid things you did was necessary. And that when we'll get to heaven, we'll wear our sins as a badge because that's what got us there. Not doing everything right, but having messed up, finding ourselves broken, and allowing ourselves to be mended again.
Yeah.
And so to just live that in front of and with our kids, it's easier to say as a grandfather than you as parents right now, as mothers. I know, but the more we try to teach it with words, the less effective we are, I'm convinced.
Yeah. That's right. I think that's right. I mean, it's about modeling.
Yep, exactly.
Absolutely. Because they'll know the disconnect, right? If it's like, do what I say, but not what I do.
Exactly.
It's hollow. Yeah.
It is hollow. Yeah. And then in spaces like education, there's actually some really interesting work being done on kind of spirituality as ways to teach kids mental health and mental wellness outside of a religious context. which I think is really interesting. And again, it's that modeling. It's that idea of experiencing awe and understanding we're not the biggest thing in the room, and that we are small in this world, and that's good, which is so countercultural to who we are as Americans.
And then to discover the awe at yourself.
Yes,
That you are one capable of experiencing this.
Yes.
Yeah.
How amazing.
Yeah.
Do you have any other kind of questions?
I think so. It's been...
Well, I'm wasted.
Yeah, you are. I'm sure you are. We just thank you so much for this. I'm sorry for the pun, but this awe-inspiring conversation. And we hope that maybe, if our podcast if we keep going, since you are such a lovely and wise neighbor, we would love for you to come back sometime.
Thank you.
And talk to us more, because we've really loved it.
It was a powerful conversation.
Thank you. It was for me too.
We want to thank our guest, Belden Lane, today. Special thanks to our producer, Justin Seiwell and Trend Media. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for joining us on this project. Be sure to subscribe to the Theist Podcast, found on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying us, please share with a friend and help us grow the show. Erin and I both have Substacks that you should check out. The links can be found in our show notes.
Our next episode, we will discuss the power of collective effervescence as it relates to community building, theater, and sports with some fantastic guests. Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.